All right, welcome to the Shadow the Script podcast. I'm your host, Jared May. This is Week 14, Rivalry Week. I'm going to say it once, and I'm going to get it right at least once, but I have to say that so many times this episode, and I'm not too excited. But welcome to the show. This is coming off a 4 out of 4 on prediction, or I think I predicted 5 games, but all 5 being correct last week. I know it was kind of a late episode. I didn't really advertise it, but a little pat on the back there. A couple of key projections all hit 100%, and over the past 5 weeks or so, I've been on fire. I think I've missed one game. So just a little pat on the back, but it gets a lot tougher this week, and so I'm going to get into quite a bit of it. This is going to be a jam-packed show. Happy Thanksgiving week to you guys. Thanks for tuning in. It's going to be both recap, reaction, analysis of the new STS poll that just came out that'll be showing on your screen here momentarily. It'll be a little bit of predictions, ACC or conference, just all conference like championship predictions and scenarios. I mean, it's gonna be a big one. Ain't gonna kid you. But I wanted to start this show off the right way here in a second, and it's something I've never really done before. But I figured like it's something I think about all the time when I go to like family events. It's like, how can you? there's always like, there's the uncle or there's the aunt that's like there's always like causing trouble, or the cousin that's always like getting the people all rowdy, or saying there might be a family member in one of your families that says something political, then all of a sudden everybody just goes ape shit berserk, right? And so I was like, what are some college football questions or statements that you could make? If they, if your family was a big college football type family, the atmosphere was toxic around. So you got some Big Ten guys in there, or you got some ACC, or you got some SEC, like my family does. What are some statements you could walk into the door, just strike up a conversation with a statement that is so blasphemingly wrong that you're almost forcing them. You're rage baiting them. You're rage baiting them is what you're doing. And so I've got a couple questions for that here in a second. But before that, I want to talk about subscriptions. I would love for you guys to subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's free. It's not going to cost you a cent. I don't ask for anything besides, maybe some participation in the comments, just because I like hearing your guys' discourse. I think you guys, there's a lot of smart people out there. I didn't come from I guess I came from like a special background, but I'm like you guys. I'm a voice for you guys, the audience. So, I don't disvalue your opinion. Now, if it needs to be educated, then I might say something. But, and who am I to judge? But all that to say, just interact. I love having the discourse with you guys and talking ball. A lot of you guys, I'm an SEC fan. So my team's the Aggies. I don't watch every single ACC game. I don't have so much background knowledge. Just like, how like if you covered the Cowboys, like if it's like, okay, I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. If somebody said, hey, is Trayvon Diggs playing tonight? What happened to Trayvon Diggs? You're going to tell me what happened to Trayvon Diggs because you've been following the team. But if you ask me, hey, Jared, what happened to George Kittle on the 49ers? I'd be like, I don't know. I think it was a hamstring. And I could know it, but then the ins and outs of it, what players are doing what. You guys know that. If you're a Miami fan, you know more about the Miami Hurricanes than I might. I might miss something. So I value your guys' input, your opinion, and I love all the comments that I've gotten so far, and I appreciate the views, and I appreciate you taking a chance on an independent account like mine. So that's something I'm grateful for in Thanksgiving week. I'm very grateful for the 90 subscribers that I have so far on the channel. I really want to make it to 100 subscribers before the end of the year. That's just a personal goal of mine. I didn't really set out any major goals, to be honest with you. I've kind of just been raw dogging it, to be honest. And once I exclusively found my niche, I guess you could say is probably the easier way to say it. Once I found my niche, I was like, hey, you know what? Let's start setting some goals. And goal number 1 is to get 100 subscribers before the end of the year. And then on TikTok, I want to make it to 1,000 followers. On Instagram and all that stuff, who knows? That algorithm is so tough to figure out. You have to pay to kind of get viewed, and I don't really like to do that. Like I said, I like to raw dog it, but I guess I could help myself out every once in a while, and maybe I get a big bonus check for Christmas. Uncle Sam's going to give me $75 on my Christmas bonus this year. So, I'll be rubbing my tummy and buying some Buc-ee's beaver nuggets on the way back from the family trip. But, so I appreciate that. And, I'm extremely grateful for you guys' support and, my close friends and my family who, we don't talk much about it. We really don't. If you want to hear the truth from me, I don't really talk much about or hear much from my family about my podcast. I'm normally the one talking college football and kind of bringing it up naturally. And if it's in the conversation, then that's where it is. But in terms of support from friends and family, I am extremely grateful. And then, of course, my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ has really blessed me with a voice to be able to do something like this, to be able to commentate high school football games, which I've done before, and I loved it. I got great feedback from it. My brothers were incredible at their roles too, including my youngest brother who was balling out on the football field when we were commentating for him. Such a special thing for him, I would imagine. And so I've done some public speaking events, things like that. So God has really blessed me with a voice, and I'm so grateful for that. And that's why I wear the cross around my neck, and I'm so grateful for what He has given me and given my family, and I'm just extremely grateful. So it ain't much, but it's honest work. And so, like the book of Job, you can take everything from me. I'm still going to believe. I'm still going to have faith. So anyway, let's get into the nitty gritty. Like I said, lots to cover in this college football episode. Happy Thanksgiving week to you guys. Let's get right into it. 5 controversial rage-baiting statements you can bring to your family Thanksgiving table, whether you're with the youngins, whether you're with the old folk, whatever you categorically fall into at your Thanksgiving dinners. These are 5 statements I think would be hilarious to say to rage bait your family members. And that way you can stray away from the political stuff. All right, here you go. If Michigan beats Ohio State, they should instantly be the number 1 team in the country. Just say that and just see what happens. Just see what happens. I guarantee everybody. What? Yeah. Number 2, Notre Dame they're in the college football playoffs because it's Notre Dame. You just leave it at that because it's just Notre Dame. It's Notre Dame. Why do you have to question it? Don't question it. Those who bless Notre Dame will be blessed. Number 3, Diego Pavia is going to win the Heisman, and he deserves it. I don't know if I've ever met anybody that's been harping on me about how Diego Pavia is just like the bee's knees. So I feel like this would be a fun one, and it's not in order. Like there is no ranking to say this is the best one, but just walk up and say, yeah, this Diego Pavia guy, he's balling out. He's the Heisman Trophy winner in his 6th year of college football. I think he should play a 7th year. That might be a better one. Number 4, the ACC is the strongest and most competitive conference in college football this year. It's not even close. The competitiveness from 9-2 teams to 8-3 teams is uncanny to the rest of the divisions in college football. Rage bait. Number 5. Ohio State just sets the bar higher. That's why they rested their starters in a conference game. They're just that good. They have separated themselves that much from the rest of college football. They just set the bar higher. That's Ohio State. That's a Buckeye. That's a horseshoe for you. So use those 5. Use those 5 statements at your upcoming Thanksgiving event. Rage bait your family members, especially if you're a Big Ten guys or an SEC guy. And of course, I'm sure there's a lot more I can think of. If I think of any more on the top of my head, I'll just kind of burst it out with ADHD throughout the episode. So, okay. Now, as we transition into the STS poll, I have it here on the screen for you guys. And, honestly, here in just a little bit, I'm going to be sharing... Sorry, I just got to say, I actually won an NFL fantasy game. My team is terrible this year, and apparently I just won. So maybe Juwan Jennings scored. I don't know. I have to start Juwan Jennings. I'm sorry. So with the STS poll, I wanted to do a post in the future of like all of the ones that I did, and just to see like the different changes. I love doing that sort of stuff. I want to see the different changes I made throughout the year. See if teams remained in the top 25, those who pounced out and came back in, and maybe do an evaluation from there. But I feel like that'd be fun. I feel like that'd be a fun way to look at things. Okay, there it is on your screen. That is the SDS poll. SDS poll Week 14 rankings. Just outside of the script, you got Tulane, Washington, Arizona State, and Wake Forest. Now, I'm not going to kid yourself. Tulane was in it last week, and I didn't feel all too comfortable with taking them out of the top 25 because they're continuing to win. They're a 9-2 Group 5 team, and they've played strongly against their conference opponents, and they got one of the best coaches in college football, and I think he'll be a name to consider for the coaching carousel in 2026. And in a different episode, maybe in the offseason, we can talk about the timeline that college football currently has set for the transfer portal and for teams to get their to build their team in December and January, which is just like the way the calendar works is a bit offsetting. So we can get into that in the offseason. But it is something to consider with college football. And that's a different topic, just to say that college football in general, it's such a great sport, and it hasn't been necessarily ruined, but there are numerous problems to get resolved in the future that can clean up college football and make it the best possible product that you can make it. And they're not there yet, but at the end of the day, college football is still, in my opinion, the most entertaining form of football there is. And ever since the recent changes, there's just so much you can talk about with college football, and there's not enough voices to talk about college football, which is why I chose it as a niche. So, but anyway, that's a different conversation. But Tulane, 9-2, they could very well finish 10-2 and potentially win the AAC conference in competition with North Texas. And then Washington at 8-3. They play Oregon in their final game of the year, so it's up in the air whether they will see the top 25. But they've been a above average Big Ten team most of the year, and Damon Williams has had his ups and downs. He hasn't been the most consistent football player. I'm not sure of his eligibility, but I'm assuming him returning next year, they could be a potential sleeper in the Big Ten, and I'm excited for what Damon Williams can do. He's a very talented player. You've just seen some ups and you've seen some downs, and in critical moments, you're like, we wish we would have saw that Damon Williams that we saw on a Friday night a couple weeks ago with like 400 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns on the night. So I'm excited to see that. But against Ohio State, they struggled. Against Michigan, I believe they struggled, and so there's just some things with Washington you got to get cleaned up. At the end of the day, they're an 8-win team. They're bowl eligible, and they're right on the cusp of being in the top 25, and they've kind of have been in that 20 to 25 category most of the year, if not just outside the script. So I feel like I've used their logo in this graphic quite a bit. Arizona State is just outside of the script at 8-3 as well. A lot of these teams are going to be 8-3 right outside the script, and this is something I wanted to kind of go back and talk to about with Tulane. Is after from 19 to 25, and we'll get to it on the list, but there's almost just not enough room to put the top 25 team. There's going to be some people left out that are argumentatively top 25 teams in the nation. But as I've always stated, it's all about resume to me. I don't feel like Arizona State or Washington has had the resume to compete with the rest of the top 25 schedules, and that's why they find themselves right outside of the top 25, just outside of the script. Now, 8-3 Wake Forest, just outside of the script as well. This is one that is a conundrum. I sent this to my college game day group, and I said, mystery team, can you guess what team this is? Because it is such a bizarre win-loss differential according to their schedule. It is so strange because they lost to North Carolina State in week 3, and a couple of teams kind of dropped one against North Carolina State, and the Wolfpack's kind of a sleeper this year. I know they're a 6-5 team, but they've played close with a lot of teams that most people might not have recognized that they would, and so Wake Forest lost to in week 3 to North Carolina State, and then they lost after a bye week to Georgia Tech by 1 point, gave them hell, 30-29 to Georgia Tech, and that was when Georgia Tech was playing hot. And so that might have been right around the time where Georgia Tech started declining as a program this year, as their schedule arguably got tougher. I would say that, yeah, I would say they arguably got tougher. Then they go on to beat Virginia Tech and Oregon State, go on a bye, and they play SMU, and they win versus SMU right before Halloween by 1 point, 13-12. And so at the time, you're like, okay, SMU 6-3 or whatever, and these are just a bunch of teams like going after it. Like, who cares? Nobody's going to bat an eye. It's Wake Forest. Then they get blown out by Florida State. So now you're really thinking, okay, like it's just Wake Forest, right? Florida State's going to beat Wake Forest. That's just the way it is. But Florida State I believe this broke their losing streak. They, for a time, it was like they were 3-5. It was bad. And then all of a sudden they blow out Wake Forest. Okay, Florida State's, the Seminoles aren't a great program this year. They started off hot. Okay, we're going to ignore that. Well, then they beat Virginia on the road, 16-9. They beat North Carolina, and then they beat Delaware. So strange to me that they can beat two top 25 ranked teams that I have in my poll, one on the road, one at home, lose to Georgia Tech at the time, who was undefeated by 1 point, and then lose to North Carolina State and get blown out by FSU. The most inconsistently unpredictable ACC team this year by far. And they're 8-3. And the final game of their season is a very winnable game. It's Duke on the road at 6-5. So they could easily find themselves being a 9-3 football team this year in the ACC, and nobody's batting an eye. It's like, Wake Forest, who cares? But I do. I think they're worth noting. I think if they win this game, they could find themselves certainly in the top 25. And of course, they're going to play a bowl game, and that should be entertaining. So that's your just outside of the script. Now, number 25 through 21. Number 25 is SMU at 8-3. Number 24 is Tennessee, also at 8-3. Number 23 is USC at 8-3 as well. Georgia Tech, number 22, falls back to 9-2 at number 22. And number 21 is Pittsburgh. So a lot of ACC teams finding their way just outside of the script and, just inside of the top 25. And so SMU, I initially had them higher on the list. But, in terms of resume, they've really only had two accomplishments. And, after them blowing out Louisville this past week, Louisville was 7-3. I think they had 3 straight losses. I mean, they were at number 10 3 weeks ago. And I said to everybody, I said, I don't trust Louisville being at number 10. I think this is the one team that's going to fall back quite a bit. I'm not sure why I had them at number 10. At the time, there was not many teams that had the record that Louisville had, nor won the competitive football games that Louisville had. I mean, I looked at their resume. I said, well, they've beaten these couple of teams, and I think it deserves like at least some recognition. And then just fell apart big time. And as right after that win versus Miami, I believe that I had them at number 10. So an interesting one there. But SMU. Their best wins are Louisville and in Miami at home. So props to me, I guess, for guessing that SMU was going to win at home. I think they're a much different team at their home stadium, and so 8-3. I think it's notable to put them in the top 25. But those Big 12 losses against Baylor and TCU those are bowl games in a sense, like they're in-season bowls. I think it's called the Iron Skillet Bowl versus TCU. And I think it's on their schedule every year because geographically they're pretty close, and that used to be in the Big 12 sort of thing. So, SMU finding their way, and they can still climb up. I think they're going to make a big jump, with their upcoming matchup this week, which we'll get into later in the episode. But Tennessee is number 24 at 8-3. Their resume isn't like eye-dropping. I think their losses are close with better teams, which is why I had them in front of SMU. They had one of the best games of the year against Georgia. They played close with, I believe it was Oklahoma. So, and their losses are just their top 10 football teams. So, and that's from losing all the starters that they had last year. That's from losing their starting quarterback, Nico. Not sure, because Joey Aguilar is playing and having an outstanding season. I mean, I believe he's leading the SEC in passing yards or passing yards per game or something like that, where And he's having an extravagant year, and it's what we did not expect. He went above and beyond the expectations that I think most analysts had prior to the season. USC falls back after losing to Oregon, and Oregon kind of kicked their teeth in. They outran them on the ground tenfold, and USC is. We've always talked about, like, we're very concerned about the defense that USC has. We all know their offense is going to be great. Lincoln Riley is going to be able to, put points in the board. They had a culture game versus Iowa that looked great. Coming back from a deficit at home to win 26-21 against a tough Iowa team, and then you find yourself against Oregon. And Oregon getting their first ever ranked win this season. Basically currently ranked, I guess. They beat their big one is beating Penn State in double overtime at the beginning of the year. So at that time, it was much different in terms of the eye test. Penn State at the time, I believe, was 2 or 3-0. Georgia Tech falls back to number 22 in the list. This is one of those ACC teams, but Pittsburgh finding their way right in front of them. What's interesting is the AP poll doesn't have Georgia Tech behind Pittsburgh. They have Georgia Tech right in front of Pittsburgh, which makes absolutely no sense because, well, just last week we saw Pittsburgh win versus Georgia Tech by 2 possessions. They had that 100-yard pick six. They controlled the outcome of the game. They had the lead most of the game. So, in terms of performance, like, I don't understand what the committee was looking at there. And Pittsburgh playing another challenging opponent this upcoming week versus Miami. A lot of ACC championship game repercussions there, and I'm sure we'll get into that. I've talked a lot about the ACC conference championship game possibilities because they seem to be endless. And last week I talked about, these certain things have to happen, and a lot of those didn't happen, in a way. But I predicted chaos to ensue, and chaos is what we're getting. But when you look at when you forecast what we're possibly going to have to deal with an ACC conference championship game, it makes you roll your eyes. It makes you throw up all over your keyboard. It's not the most likable matchup that we could get. So we'll see. We will see. The group of 5 teams, JMU, number 20, and number 19, North Texas. And, North Texas is continuing to stride. Their quarterback is arguably one of the best in college football in terms of efficiency. And JMU kind of went unnoticed because they had a tough win versus Washington State. It was a close ball game, but Washington State has played Ole Miss close. They've played some other teams relatively close, but they've gotten blown out by teams like South Florida, I believe. Just such a weird type team, but that was one of those games where you kind of wanted to see something from James Madison, and we saw it. Excuse me. So the Sun Belt is led by JMU. There's really nobody else in that division that's going to be challenging or usurping that spot from JMU. So whoever JMU plays, I would project that James Madison wins that football game. But these are your Group 5 leaders, and we'll get into that here in a second. Number 18, Arizona jumps all the way from just outside the script inside of the top 20. They had a great win this past weekend, and I have Texas right in front of them. My buddy made a good point, said that, head-to-head, Texas would probably beat Arizona. I tend to agree with that. But, Texas, I'm not overhyping their win versus Arkansas. Everybody scores points versus Arkansas's defense, just the way it is. Arkansas has 5 SEC games where they lost to, I believe it's 5, where they lost by 3 points or less, and they're scoring 30-plus points a game. So for Texas to go out there and score 50-plus points against them, it was impressive, sure. But, and Arch Manning had himself a hell of a day, and good for him. But in terms of like overhyping it, they're saying like Arch is back or he's in his bag or something like that. There's still a lot more that needs to happen. Of course, they have one of the biggest games of the weekend coming up, Texas versus Texas A&M in Austin. Your ACC leaders, arguably, are Miami at number 15 and Virginia at number 16. So Virginia is one of those teams that without, they had played a game or so, or half a game without their starting quarterback. And that proved to be detrimental to their team because, like teams like Virginia don't have the depth that maybe these bigger programs do. So they're extremely lenient, a lot like SMU last year in the playoffs. They're extremely lenient on their starting roster to where, if you get to go beyond that, it's not going to look that pretty. So we talked about it last year with like SMU going to Penn State. You're like, okay, can we imagine in the winter SMU going into Penn State for a whiteout game and coming out with a victory? No. And what happened? Exactly that. So Virginia, I think, is a very similar team. Miami, though, I mean, a lot of people are saying, how is Miami behind Notre Dame? I understand that. Here's something I want to talk about with Miami. And they've started to get better after their two losses to SMU and Louisville. They've played better, for sure. But something needs to be understood, and I think the committee looks at it this way. I'm not sure that I do. In fact, I know that I do. I look at it in terms of when did you lose and what have you done since then? And so when Miami beat Notre Dame in the first week of the college football season, it was, Notre Dame 0-2. They lost two top 10 teams by a combined 4 points. Miami started off really strong. Then they had those two losses on a Friday night to Louisville, and then on the road versus SMU. But they've made it all the way back to 9-2, same record as Notre Dame. But Notre Dame's losses are categorically better looking. I don't like to reward losses. That's not what I'm doing here. What I'm saying is Miami, it matters when you beat somebody and when you lose somebody. So if you lost to somebody at the very beginning of the year or beat somebody at the very beginning of the year, and then you accumulate a loss mid-season or late season, it looks a lot worse if you lose later in the season than you did at the beginning of the season. Put this hypothetical into perspective. Let's say that Texas, lost they lost the game versus Ohio State, 7-14 at the beginning of the year. But let's say they didn't lose a game after that. Dude, they would be, or lost one other game after that. They would be inside the top 10 for sure, easily. And because they look at the brand and they overvalue it and they say, well, they lost that game way long ago at the beginning of the season. They're a much better team now than they were at the beginning of the season, and they're peaking. So that's the reason that Miami and Notre Dame they're close, but Miami's behind them. It matters when you won and when you lost. And I think the committee looks at it the same way, and I'm not saying it by any means that I trust what the committee thinks, but I understand their reasoning in this certain circumstance. And so with that being said, I just, my whole channel is to debunk the mainstream media. And so this is one thing that they're a lot more widespread on the AP poll, but on mine, and they're only 2 spots away from one another. So it's not too terribly of a big deal. And the teams in front of them, Michigan's been a very consistent team all year. They accumulated a loss versus Oklahoma. So number 4 at the beginning of the year. So in week 3 or so on the road. So number 14, Michigan at 9-2. Number 13 is Utah at 9-2. And Utah is that third team in the Big 12 that, could possibly find their way in the college football playoffs. I would imagine they're one of the first 4 teams out of the selection. But they had by far probably the most entertaining football game this weekend. I was not able to watch it, but I did see the play that got them into the game and got them the win. Not into the game, but got them into the red zone inside the 10 that gave Utah the ability to come out with a victory, and it was electric. So this game was high scoring, shootout, high flying. I mean, it was one of those teams like Kansas State. We talk about all the time. Not a team you want to see on their schedule. They're a lot worse this year than they have been in previous seasons, but they gave Utah a scare, and Utah survived. Number 12, Notre Dame, and number 11, Vanderbilt. Notre Dame winning versus Syracuse 70-6. I think I heard somewhere that that's the worst Syracuse has been beaten since like 1893 versus like the Union in like a scrimmage game. So they basically played the Army and lost by like a shit ton. So Syracuse, talk about the DB list, talk about the down bad list. That's where they're at. And the conundrum here too is another reason you could put Miami in front of, or put Notre Dame in front of Miami. Not that I like to, but Miami beat Syracuse like 38-10, and Notre Dame beat Syracuse 70-7. And they both played Syracuse later in the year. I believe Miami played Syracuse in week 10, and Notre Dame just played them last week. So that would be another one. It's just the margin of victory. That could be what the committee is looking at. With number 11 Vanderbilt, I still think they got a big game coming up this weekend. I still think that there's a potential upset for Tennessee in the books. We'll see how that goes. It's a rivalry game. Diego Pavia has made a lot of statements saying that Tennessee is or Vanderbilt's going to run Tennessee after this year, and you'll see it tenfold. And I'm not sure that that's going to be the case, but they got a coach that's pretty good, damn good coach. They've had a quarterback, Diego Pavia, for 2 or 3 years, and I know he's in his 6th year of college football, and he's doing like some type of class action suit versus the NCAA about JUCO eligibility against D1 eligibility, which I full-heartedly disagree with. I believe that junior college eligibility should count towards your D1 eligibility, or else what are we doing? I'm a JUCO guy myself, so for me to say like, okay, I'm going to redshirt my junior college year, play 2 years, develop, and then go into the NCAA, and it's like, okay, now I have 4 years eligibility. No, it should not work that way. That would fundamentally uproot the whole purpose of junior college. So we could get into that in the offseason as well. Number 10, making their way past they jumped Notre Dame and Vanderbilt on the list. Making their way into the top 10 is BYU, and BYU is going to find themselves most likely in the Big 12 conference championship game with a rematch against Texas Tech, and I think that game rides on whether or not they'll be selected into the college football playoffs. I think, I'm tired of the chirping. I kind of want BYU to get a shot. I'm not going to lie. I know they got a freshman quarterback. I don't think they're the most entertaining team in the college football sector, but, give them a shot. Why not? I mean, you want to talk about a Big 12 as some superior conference, and you want to talk your shit like a lot of people on X are doing, let's put them up against these guys and see what they can do at a neutral site or at home or away, and see what effect it can be drawn. So why not? Why not put BYU in? But they find themselves at number 10. Number 9 through number 1 is the same as last week. Not much changing for the most part. The only change I would say is Texas Tech jumping Ole Miss on the ranking. I did that last minute. I felt like it was the honorable thing to do for Texas Tech and to honor them being a conference leader. But number 9 is Alabama. Number 8 right in front of them is Oklahoma with the head-to-head win over Alabama, coming off another victory versus Missouri. Number 7 with an impressive win over USC at home, 42-28 or 27, is the Oregon Ducks. So they did a lot better than I anticipated against USC. So that's a strong sign that Oregon could be a contender, and good news for them. So number 6 is Ole Miss. A lot of chatter around Ole Miss right now. There's going to be a lot of especially with the controversy with Lane Kiffin, giving him an ultimatum before the Egg Bowl, him denying the claim that even was a thing. So we're not going to have a decision before the Egg Bowl. It's going to be after the Egg Bowl, because the statement that Ole Miss released saying we're going to hear something, after the Egg Bowl. And some people have made some chirps about what they think is going to happen. I've talked about it a little bit. I personally believe that Lane Kiffin's going to stay in Ole Miss. I don't know. The only other possibility I see, I don't see him going to Florida, but I think he can find himself in a pickle if he continues to let this drag on. But again, it goes back to the whole college football calendar. It's just these teams got to make a decision. They got to build their team in December and January with the transfer portal, and throughout the spring they got to get that unit rolling, and it's just inconvenient timing. So it's not Lane Kiffin's fault. It's not Ole Miss's fault. It's not necessarily LSU or anybody else's fault. It's just the way that college football operates currently, and it is a problem, but we'll see how that shakes out. Number 5 is Texas Tech. They are the leader of the Big 12, like I mentioned. They're the conference leader. I'm honoring that and putting them over Oregon and Ole Miss. The AP poll has Oregon at number 5, making that jump to after beating USC. They overvalued the brand of USC just a little ticky-tack more than what I would, and I think it's still honorable to put them at number 7. I think that's respective. I don't think it's a big deal for them to be 5 or 7. I think they're third place in their conference. So I think that's where they belong. And Michigan could possibly jump the gun on that this weekend with the rivalry game versus Ohio State. Number 4 is Georgia. The Bulldogs, they're playing Georgia Tech this upcoming weekend. That's a big-time matchup for, I guess, in terms of making Georgia Tech look better in their conference championship. But whatever happens to Georgia, they still have like a difficult scenario to overcome to get themselves into the SEC championship game. So Alabama needs to beat Auburn, which seems to be a nightmare sometimes for Alabama. Not that they lose, but they tend to be close games. So this new true freshman for Auburn might put up a master class in this bowl game. Who knows? But Alabama going on the road. We'll see what happens. Number 3 is Indiana, staying where they are. Number 2, Texas A&M, going into Texas this weekend for a rivalry game. And Ohio State, the big one. They've been preparing for Michigan for about 7 weeks now. They've rested their starters against the Rutgers in a conference game. That's kind of gotten a little chirping and controversy, so I'm with them. But Michigan could get their 5th straight win against Ohio State this upcoming weekend and cause a lot of mayhem and panic in the Big Ten, because that would put Michigan in the conference championship game, but I could be wrong on that. I haven't really dove into those scenarios, but I want to say Michigan is got a decent possibility to get into the Big Ten championship, because one of their losses is in the SEC and not in the Big Ten. So, but yeah, that wraps up the STS poll analysis here for Week 14. You're 25 through 1 with the just outside of the script. So, I like it. There, and where it gets dicey is 19 through 25. Like I mentioned, there's just a lot you could switch around, and you can argue with the wall on a lot of these. And, I had some people chirping about 12 through 15 saying, Miami should be in front of Notre Dame, or why is Utah behind Notre Dame, and this, that, the other. And there's arguments. I'm not stupid. There's arguments. You want to switch those things around, switch them around, make your own rankings. That's what it's all about. It's what the discourse is about. So, however you want to tackle that, just make sure you have backup information to support your claim. And I'm not gonna degrade you. So, all right. But yeah, let's get that poll off the screen there. I'll kind of reference back at it as we continue to go through the nooks and crannies of college football. But okay, some want to talk about these a little bit, because on the poll, we have some controversial topics. Ohio State at number 1, right? So a lot of people were talking about the Buckeyes resting their top 2 wide receivers who, reportedly were banged up, and they were playing the Rutgers. So they're like, oh, we're going to rest our guys against a conference team, and nobody's going to bat an eye. Well, people batted an eye. People said, okay, well, a lot of people that was outside of the Big Ten, they said, how in the world, you can't afford to do that in the SEC. You can't afford to rest your best players prior to a conference game. But in the Big Ten, I guess you can. And so I tend to agree with that. I do. Full-heartedly. I think that's a fair judgment. I think that people have spoken their minds and said, hey, what is this about? Like, if we're really going to talk about Ohio State being the number 1 team in the country, and your argument is they just set the bar higher, or they're just that much better than everybody else, I think that's a little ridiculous, because we're not going to act like Rutgers is a big challenge. We went into, look at Texas. Texas played Arkansas, who has not won a conference game this year, and they're 2-9, and they put up 37 points against Texas. and they had to play every one of their starters to outscore them. So, and you're like, oh, well, that's just the SEC. The SEC is not as good as the Big Ten. Cap. I mean, I've done the research. Like, you guys are a lot of the Big Ten guys are banking off the last year or so and referencing the college football playoffs, which I believe, last year was the first 12-team playoff. So a lot of people are looking at that going, oh, yeah, what argument do we have against the Big Ten? The last 10 years. That's what you have as an argument. The SEC has won playoff matchups, bowl matchups, head-to-head matchups. Overall record is way stronger. The evidence does not support that the Big Ten is just this big, mighty, strong conference that overtakes the SEC. It just is not. I'm sorry. That's the statistical data does not point to that at all. What you guys are banking on is the big-time brands within the Big Ten that are carrying the weight, and you guys are riding on their coattails. That's what it is. Because Indiana was not some superpower before Cignetti. They were not. They were not a successful program before Cignetti arrived. Ohio State has always been. Michigan has always been pretty decent, especially with Harbaugh. Outside of the Harbaugh era, but what championships did you see them in? And so, you look at Ohio State, and then Oregon wasn't always in the Big Ten. Now that they are, it's like, well, great. USC wasn't always in the Big Ten. Well, now they are, and it's like, okay. Penn State, they've always been pretty good. James, that's another team that they're kind of riding off the coattails of. And so I think what the Big Ten does is they lean off those big-time premium brands, and they say nobody's as good as the Big Ten, but then they look at the rest of the Big Ten, and they just kind of ignore it. Because Oregon hasn't been to a national championship since 2015. They've only won one championship since 2010. So in 15 years, they've appeared in two, and they haven't appeared in another one since 2015. So, and they were always a Pac-12 team. They weren't always a Big Ten team. And so, furthermore, when you go deep inside of the Big Ten schedule, you got this big list of teams. So many teams in the Big Ten. They're everywhere. Washington, Oregon, USC, Penn State, Indiana, Ohio State, this, that, and the other, and Michigan. And it's like, do any of them play one another? And I know the SEC kind of has those challenges in certain ways. People have looked at Texas A&M's schedule and said, oh, they've played everybody categorically on the bottom of the SEC. Before the season, Florida was a favorite to be a contender. Before the season, LSU was a favorite to have Nussmeier as a Heisman and a first-round draft pick. He was benched. All these sorts of things didn't go the way that these teams had planned. Missouri was an 8-9 win team last year. And they're pretty damn close to that this year, but they had some injury problems. But there's a lot of brands in the SEC that I think they play one another, and they've started to play one another in a much larger capacity. And so, you look at Texas' schedule, you look at South Carolina's schedule, you look at Vanderbilt, you look at Alabama, who had a very tough schedule this year, Georgia, Tennessee. These guys are playing the top 10 teams on the poll. They're playing 10 to 20 ranked teams on the poll. And what people tend to forget and always neglect is it's like, okay, well, the committee overvalues SEC teams. They shouldn't be ranked anyway. Nonetheless, you can't disregard the fact that whether they should be ranked or not, it is a ranked game. So going into these atmospheres where your team is ranked makes it all the more difficult to go get a win on the road or go on the road or have a win at home versus a superior opponent. Because when you're ranked, more people show up to the game. More people are invested in the team. And so when these things happen, it's like people forget, like, oh, wow. Or they just completely neglect the fact it's like, oh, yeah, the committee has 7 or 8 SEC teams inside of the top 25. There's such a big SEC bias. It's like, there's really not, because, on the poll, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 Big Ten teams, and then 1 outside of the top 25. So I'm just like, what more do you guys want? What team that is not inside of the top 25 that are playing in the Big Ten should be ranked? That's not. You want Iowa in there? You want Washington in there? They haven't beat anybody that has been a ranked team for inside the Big Ten. They haven't. So I'm not sure what you guys are looking for. The Big 12 is another one. They play 9 conference games. That's a very tough schedule. And people overlook that all the time. It's like, well, BYU this, and dude, they've played a lot of teams. Some idiot on X was saying that Texas Tech hasn't had a big win all year. It's been Kansas State. I was like, brother, like what are you talking about? Or it was like, what are you talking about? They beat Utah on the road. They beat BYU. They beat Houston, who was like ranked at the time, and they're 8-3 football team. Idiot. He said their best win was Kansas State. Idiot. And that's an Aggie. Sorry. He does not represent me. So that's another conundrum, I think, that's a little misguided. And, I don't want to be, I'm stating facts. I'm not trying to throw opinions out there. That whole argument comes from a factual, I looked it up, state of the art, statistical, cemented fact saying, you guys are saying the Big Ten is better than the SEC. The data just does not support that. And I get it. In the past 2 years, there have been some recent changes to the conferences. It's a lot different now. But, SEC beats each other up. They're going to 9 conference games next year. What more do you want out of them? What do you want out of them? I mean, they got the more draft picks. They got the better coaches, arguably. I mean, I don't understand. I don't know. So, and the other thing, one thing I thought was interesting financially, I'll move to number 12, Notre Dame. They're 9-2 in the year. They're blowing every opponent out. They haven't played. I don't believe there's a large fraction of their schedule are Power 4 teams that are sub 500 programs this year. And so that's why I haven't put them inside the top 10 at all. They've been at 12 or 13 most of the year since they've gotten to 5 wins. So 4 to 5 weeks in a row where they've been, outside of the top 10. The committee doesn't think that. The committee puts them at inside of the top 10. I completely full-heartedly disagree. And so the reason for their scheduling, for the people, if you want to debunk the mainstream media on this, because I went down a deep rabbit hole, I think most people collectively know that Notre Dame accumulates a lot of money from their NBC sports deal. I guess what's just paired with Peacock as well. So their viewership and television rights that they sign with Notre Dame allows them to be paid $60 to $75 million a year, which is more than an SEC team or a Big Ten team, and to get exclusive TV rights and viewership rights on NBC to get a nationally televised game. And so that's why they're independent. That's why all the comments are saying, hey, or Notre Dame is doing this because they'd be stupid to abandon this contract. And they're right. They'd be extremely stupid and ignorant to abandon the amount of money that they're accumulating on this NBC deal. It is beneficial to NBC, and it's extremely beneficial to Notre Dame. And the contract runs until 2029. However, there's a lot of people that have voiced their opinions against this narrative to say, well, Notre Dame, yeah, I understand. We understand that the climate for Notre Dame's scheduling, them being an independent, this, that, and the other, and they're in the ACC practically in almost every other sport. And what other sport has Notre Dame been good at other than football? Not much. They're not a good baseball team, and not a notable basketball team. So in terms of that, like their football is like the one thing at that school that's just like prominent, where because of the money that they accumulate in this NBC deal, and because they're an independent, and because they handpick their schedule to all these quote unquote Power 4 teams and maybe some 2 or 3 nationally televised games, I don't like that is the way that it is, but it's not going to change anytime soon. It's probably not going to change after 2029 either. My guess is that the contract will get extended because it's all about money. You got to follow the money. And when you follow the money with Notre Dame, it tells you that they make more than any team in television and viewership rights than the SEC big time dogs, than the Big Ten big time dogs, and the Big 12 dogs. So that's just the way that it is. I don't like it. The committee seems to love it. A lot of the boomers seem to overvalue it. But that's just the way it is. Then they appeared in the national championship last year. You can argue that the schedule to get them into the college football playoffs, let alone within the playoffs to the national championship, was not as impressive as it might have appeared on paper because of Georgia's injury to Carson Beck. And I know Gunnar Stockton's playing pretty good this year, but at the time, his first start being in the semifinal game is a little bit hard of an ask. But I'm not saying I dislike Marcus Freeman or anybody or Jeremiah Love. I'm not going to disrespect any of those players or coaches because I believe what Marcus Freeman is doing over there, we all know what they are. We all know the identity of Notre Dame. They're going to play physical. They can compete with some of the good teams, but what people are wanting to see, and it's such a fair requirement and it's a fair ask to say, can Notre Dame be a part of a schedule that is conference games so they can play for a conference championship, so that we don't have to get to this big time question at the end of every year to say, man, what are we going to do about Notre Dame? They don't play a conference championship. So if these guys lose, does that mean Notre Dame gets in? I mean, how do we want to do that? Do we want to, we're doing a 16-team playoff format or a 24-team playoff format? Notre Dame's going to make the damn playoffs every fucking year. If you expand it any more than 12, Notre Dame will never miss a playoff. Mark my words. They'll never miss one. They'll be 10-2, 11-1, 12-0 pretty much every year, and they'll be in the playoffs. So I disagree with it full-heartedly, but I understand it from a financial aspect. And if I was the AD or anybody in that for that matter, I wouldn't make that change. I guess there would be like a prove it factor that I'd want to hang on to, and like a pride thing to say, let's go compete with these guys. Let's put our money where our mouth is and show the type of premium brand that we are, and go play an ACC or Big Ten schedule. Let's just go do it. Let's do a contract, see how it goes. And if it fails, well, then you were exposed. If it doesn't, well, then you put your money where your mouth is. And if anything, I think if they had better games in the schedule, NBC would get more viewers, more people tuning into the game. So I don't know. I full-heartedly disagree with it, but I understand it from a financial standpoint. Okay, so I'm going to check my notes here. So the ACC, in or out? How many of these teams get into the college football playoffs? I can answer that right now for you. One team. One team's going to get in. It's going to be the conference championship winner, and it's not going to be one that you like. I would almost guarantee it. Now that Georgia Tech has lost, that has allowed a pathway for both Pittsburgh or SMU to find their way into the ACC conference championship game. And on top of that, Miami plays a very tough game against Pittsburgh this upcoming weekend. Miami lost to SMU early in the year. SMU still only has one loss in the conference. So does Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh just came off beating Georgia Tech, so Georgia Tech doesn't have that head-to-head tiebreaker. And so with that, you get also Georgia Tech playing Georgia this upcoming weekend. I highly doubt Georgia Tech wins that football game, making them 9-3. SMU is most likely going to win their game, making them 9-3, forcing somebody, most likely Pittsburgh and Miami, to lose their game. Because more than likely, Virginia, coming off a bye, is going to go into Virginia Tech this weekend and win. I know it's a rivalry game. I know they're probably going to want to show out for James Franklin if he's there or something like that. That could be a potential upset in the making. We don't know. I don't think Virginia Tech has the firepower to do it. I'm sure most everybody else thinks the same way as I do on that. But that would put Virginia, I would say Virginia has the best chance to find their way in the conference championship for sure, in the ACC. But these other teams, there's so many matchups, and we'll get into them, that are just like the final countdown, right? The witching hour for the ACC, as Scott Hansen puts it for NFL Red Zone. It's like, which teams are going to do it? Pittsburgh's going to go in there, and they could collapse against Miami, and Miami gets to 10-2, and Miami's in. Or SMU wins their game, and Pittsburgh wins their game, and then you go to head-to-head, and you're like, okay, is it Pittsburgh or SMU? Who gets the tiebreaker? And then, Virginia's playing either of those two teams. So, or Georgia Tech could win. So there's a lot that goes in the ACC championship game. And, I had all the scenarios down a week or so ago, and now it's just kind of a cluster. And I don't really know what to think. And I really, honestly, don't care all too much because I don't believe in the ACC. I don't believe the ACC is a prominent conference this year. I believe that the Big 12 has overcome them. I think that they have stronger teams. Even with Utah, I think Utah is a stronger team than the winner of the ACC Conference Championship game, and I'd rather see Utah in over the championship winner for the ACC by a mile. They've at least shown a heavy amount of consistency and have played close with the second place team in the Big 12 in the Holy War with BYU. And they were close for 3 quarters with Texas Tech, and then the game got away from them. Those are their only 2 losses this year in a 9-conference schedule. So, I don't know. I think, upcoming matchups with playoff and conference championship repercussions, there's a lot. There's 4 of them, 4 or 5 of them. So, and we'll get into predicting that in just one moment. So the Big 12, Texas Tech, BYU, Utah, wrapping up the Big 12 conference championship game. There's some big games coming up for the Big 12. And so one of the cool things about the Big 12 is that we get a Texas team in the playoffs, another Texas-based team in the playoffs. And I'm from Texas. I like rooting for Texas teams. Told people in the comments I'm rooting for SMU. I hope they get in. I hope they show up, show out. You could have a scenario where you have Texas A&M, Texas Tech, SMU, and potentially, I doubt this happens, but if Texas were to beat Texas A&M, potentially have a 4th Texas team in the college football playoff. And you would have 4 Texas-based teams. That would make me feel good about where I'm from. That would make me feel good about my heritage coming here from the South over here in Texas. But Utah plays Kansas on Friday. This is an 11 a.m. game right after Thanksgiving. So Kansas is 5-6 on the year. So Utah gets a favorable matchup there. Texas Tech plays West Virginia, favorable matchup there. And then BYU plays UCF, who's also 5-6, another favorable matchup there. So more than likely, all 3 of those teams win their football game. BYU goes to 11-1. Utah goes to 10-2, and Texas Tech goes to 11-1. You get a Texas Tech versus BYU conference championship game, into which I think Texas Tech would win that football game, going to 12-1 and finding themselves with potentially a first-round bye, because more than likely, we'll skip ahead to kind of like the SEC championship outlook. More than likely, Alabama, if they win over Auburn, is going to be in the conference championship game. And I know there's a way. I think if Texas A&M loses to Texas, there's definitely a way for, I think, it to be Georgia and Alabama in the SEC championship game. And then the least likely outcome that needs the most help is Ole Miss. They need an Alabama loss, a Georgia loss, and a Texas A&M. They need a lot of losers. They need a lot of losers this weekend, and they got to take care of business against Mississippi State as well, who has a high scoring offense in the SEC. They're not the best team, but they got a high scoring offense. So, but with Alabama, let's say A&M beats Texas and Alabama beats Auburn, and they're both Alabama versus Texas A&M in the SEC Conference Championship game. Well, Alabama's they're near number 10 or 9 in the AP poll this week. So are they going to jump all the way up to number 4? Are they, even if they lose that game, let's say Texas A&M wins that game. Texas A&M wins the conference championship for the SEC. Where do you put Alabama? The Texas Tech's probably going to jump that and get a 4th round or get a first round bye. So I would expect that, at least. I would expect to see Texas Tech finding their way very closely into a first-round bye scenario. Then, again, we've talked about this before, but after their first-round bye, those first round of playoffs teams, they're getting home and away games, and then you go to bowl games. So the people that get a first-round bye get to play at a neutral site. I think that that's crap, and that everybody in the first round of the playoffs should play it. I don't know. I think that if you're getting a first-round bye, you deserve a home game. You've earned it. You've won the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC, whatever. You've won those championship games. You should deserve a home game. But I get it. I get it. I guess the bowl games have to have a place to play. You got to find a neutral site, and you got to make money as an NCAA organization. So, and another thing with Tier 2 of the SEC with Ole Miss, Oklahoma, Alabama, and Vanderbilt. So Ole Miss with their win would be a one-loss SEC team, locking themselves into the college football playoffs for sure. Oklahoma, if they win their game against LSU, who really struggled against a very subpar team this past weekend, I would expect OU to win that football game and at home. I believe it's at home. And so with that, you would have 10-2 Oklahoma, 11-1 Ole Miss, Alabama winning their rivalry game, going to 10-2. Vanderbilt, I don't know what's going to happen against that Tennessee team, but let's just say that they lost. They're 9-3. So is Tennessee. Tennessee's out. That would probably bring Vanderbilt out. And you would have 5 SEC teams in the college football playoffs, and I think that's not bad. I think that's not too terrible of a scenario. That's not too much chaos. But if Vanderbilt were to win, and Texas were to win, then the committee might have to really consider putting. I don't want this to happen. I'm not saying it should happen, but we've seen that the committee overvalues brand. If Texas were to get a top 5 win against A&M at home and finish 9-3 with a close loss versus the number 1 team in the country, I think the committee is going to look at that and say, you know what, maybe they should get a shot at this playoff thing. And we're not terribly sure about these other teams right outside of the cusp, but we know that Texas has beat these ranked teams before, and they've shown they can win big games. So let's give them a crack. I think that shouldn't be a likely scenario, but I have a fear that the committee might look at that in a different way than I do if Texas were to upset Texas A&M. But that would I think A&M would 100% remain in the college football playoffs, 100%. If they weren't, that'd be blasphemy. They've cemented themselves in my opinion, no matter what happens. But, yeah. But I think let's get into key predictions. There's a ton of predictions to do. And big stretch, sorry. You know what? I'll take this time to do like a mini little break. If you made it this far in the episode, thanks for joining in. And this is our Thanksgiving episode. And like I mentioned, there's a lot to be thankful for. But subscribers, I'm trying to get to 100 subscribers before the end of the year. I would really appreciate if you're listening to this for the first time, and if you know anybody or have friends or family that you think would enjoy this type of content, debunking the mainstream media and shattering the script, then hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything. I'm not asking for anything. And if you guys were to talk in the comments or repost videos or engage in the STS poll post, on X or on TikTok or anything like that, I'm always happy to do the discourse with you guys and talk ball. But I set a goal for myself, trying to get to, I need 10 more subscribers. And if you guys help me get past that, I'd be eternally grateful. That'd be my Christmas present. And I think that's a good benchmark for the second legitimate year of this podcast. The second. So 100 subscribers, independent, raw dogging it. I'm proud of myself in a way. Proud of myself. In other news, a big reminder December 1st, I am announcing something big, something I'm super excited about. I think it's perfect timing as well, not to quote Shedeur Sanders, but I think it's perfect timing. I think it's going to be right before the college football playoffs. It's going to kind of light a spark and provide a new perspective on things in terms of the college football atmosphere. And I'm terribly excited about it. I think it's going to be electric. I think it's going to be entertaining for you guys. It creates a certain perspective on the show that hasn't been heard or seen before, and creates a little bit of drama for future episodes and for future content. So I'm going to be all for it, and we're going to find different ways to make this platform unique. We're going to make it in such a way that you guys say, well, nobody else does this. And, everybody else always is trying to do this and asking for this and begging for this, that, and the other. But this one's different in a way that the people love. So make sure to subscribe. And if you're not following the socials on Instagram, X, or TikTok, you can search at Shout Out the Script or STS_pod on X, and you'll find the golden logo for the Shout Out the Script podcast. So as for the STS network, we transition ourselves into predictions for Rivalry Week. And thank God that is only the second time I've had to say that. I've really tried to hold my tongue on that. Let's get right into this. So, that's weird. Oh, interesting. Okay, on Thursday, honestly, if you guys don't like to watch NFL, on Thursday, you kind of have a fun Group 5 matchup between 8-2 Navy and 8-3 Memphis. So if I had to predict that game out the gate, I'd say Memphis wins by 10 points. I think Memphis wins that ball game. Memphis has the home game as well. Navy has shown signs of strength, but I don't know. I think Memphis gets a dub on that. But that's something if you're disinterested in watching the NFL on Thanksgiving, you don't want to watch your team lose and lose your appetite for the amazing food that you're going to have on your plate, then I recommend watching something that maybe you're not all too emotionally invested in. Friday, 6:30 p.m., the big kahuna. I'll start off hot. I guess this is my spotlight. Muster up the energy. Okay. Number 2 on my poll, Texas A&M at number 17 on my poll, the Texas Longhorns. A&M, as we all know, undefeated, 11-0. Texas, 8-3, coming off a win versus Arkansas. A&M coming off Cake Week versus Samford at home. Kind of a get-right game to prepare themselves for Texas. And so I look at it in terms of quarterback pressure. The pass rush for Texas A&M. We've talked about it all year. Cassius Howe, some of the younger cats on the other side. The defensive interior, the linebacker play from Torian York and Scooby Williams. We saw Georgia demolish Arch Manning in the pocket, not giving him any time to throw. They're having to throw checkdowns, things underneath, and I think they're going to see a lot of that against Texas A&M because that pressure is going to be hot, it's going to be quick, it's going to be consistent, and so you're going to see a lot of under the line of scrimmage type play calling and schematics throughout the game, and that's kind of been Texas's identity throughout the year. And so for Texas to click offensively, I think, like we've talked about with other matchups in the past, Texas is going to have to find a way to kind of keep the ball from Texas A&M because the Aggies are very excellent at explosive plays. We've seen that they're excellent from deficits. We've seen they can control the clock in the second half. We've seen that once they get to the locker room, the second half is a completely different football team. And I'm not just talking about the South Carolina game. There's been a couple games where it was close for the first quarter to half to halftime, and then they get to the locker room, they make some adjustments, and it's just like a different football team to come out in the second half. And so for Texas to combat the pass rush of Cassius Howe and the linebacker play and the run game for the Aggies, and to have two cornerbacks on the outside that have been playing phenomenal this year, in Willie III and the other cat out there that I believe he had an injury a couple weeks ago, and they rested him an extra week. But I believe he's going to be playing in the Texas game and somehow keep eligibility. I think he got hurt in the Notre Dame game, but I think he's supposed to be back for this Texas game. But the Aggies defensively, a lot of people have talked about how they have played kind of like a cupcake SEC schedule to where all the teams are on the bottom half. And whereas that might be a true statement, what is not true is that teams that have played the teams that A&M have beaten have played them close, such as Mississippi State. The Longhorns played them close. The Aggies beat the crap out of them. Florida. Texas lost to Florida. A&M beat the crap out of Florida. And so A&M has done relatively what they're supposed to do. Both teams kind of played closer against Arkansas. Texas pulled away in a much grander fashion against Arkansas, but that's kind of your comparables. It's to see like, okay, both teams played an out-of-conference game this year that was tough. Texas played Ohio State, arguably the toughest matchup out of conference in college football this year. 7-14 was the final. Very defensively scrappy game. And then A&M played Notre Dame on the road. Both Texas and the Aggies played their out-of-conference big-time matchups on the road. But A&M won and put up 41 points against Notre Dame. So a lot of comparables there. But then I look in the Texas offense, and like I mentioned, you're going to see a lot of screens. You're going to see a lot of, controlling the clock, running the football, trying to convert on third downs. And A&M is exceptional at preventing third downs defensively. And then on the flip side of the ball, the Aggies have been waiting for Le'Veon Moss to return for quite some time since suffering that injury. And I believe he's questionable for this game. I'm not quite sure if he's going to be playing in it, but they found an identity without Le'Veon Moss. But if they were to obtain Moss for this upcoming matchup, I think the outcome would be a lot different. I think he adds an extra spark to that running back room that, he's an explosive running back. No one really talks about him, but Le'Veon Moss is one of the best running backs in the country when he's healthy. This offensive line has great protection. But as I was saying, Georgia playing Texas, they were not a statistically good pass rush team, and they got after Arch Manning all game, harassing him. So to play one of the best pass rush teams in the country, you would think that that's going to be a huge problem. I tend to not overcomplicate things when I'm predicting outcomes. I know this is a rivalry game, but we saw last year that Quinn Ewers and this program were going places. They were competing for playoff spots, first round buys, national championships. They're like 11 and 12 and 3 in the SEC since joining, or some crazy number. And A&M is not like that until this year. But last year we were fumbling around, losing games we shouldn't get. Like the Aggies were losing games they shouldn't have lost. Marcel Reed was tipping his passes and his runs, like with his stance. Like there's just a lot of things that showed like, hey, A&M had a good team and a good roster, and they can play close with a team like Texas, but they weren't as good as them, and they got stonewalled 3 or 4 times in the goal line. I just don't think that is the same. I don't think that's the case this year. I truly believe that Texas A&M is a better football team. I believe they have a better pass rush. They have a better run game. They're better at explosive plays. I think Mike Elko has coached his ass off this year. I think A&M has developed an identity that Texas might not have figured out yet. And so with all that being said, I do believe Texas A&M is going to win this football game. They're going to kick the door down, as I always say. But I think the Aggies go in there to Austin, and I think it's going to be a lot closer game because Texas plays so much better at home than they do on the road. And the repercussions, the tickets are going to be sold the hell out. It's going to be super loud. And all those things could cause an upset for sure. But I think Texas A&M goes in there and they get it done. They go 12-0, and it's going to be some type of game where you're going to see some points. You're not going to see it like last year where almost no touchdowns are scored. I think you're going to see, 27-21 type, 27-23. It's not going to be a blowout either way. If Texas wins, it's going to be close. It's like by a field goal. But if A&M wins, like I think it's going to be by a touchdown or, more than a field goal, if you will. But if anyone's going to blow out anybody, I think A&M blows out Texas. Lord forbid I'm wrong, but after everything we've seen this year, I don't see Texas just demolishing A&M's defense. I just don't. But if I'm wrong, then that's okay. I'm trying to do this take in the most non-emotional, you can probably hear in my tone, but in the most non-emotional way. I've tell people all the times that are a fan of teams, you have to remove the emotional aspect from your take. You have to have a level head when you're talking sports. So that's my level-headed projection. I think Texas A&M wins 27-23 on the road versus Texas in the hostile environment. And the Aggies move to 12-0, and they cement themselves in the SEC championship, where you could see a much different outcome in the SEC championship game, where I may not trust A&M in that game versus a Texas team. All right, next game on the list, Arizona at Arizona State on Friday. This is your 8 p.m. game, so you're going to have games all day, by the way, on Friday, which is super nice. But it's just kind of a fun one to predict. But I tend to like the coach better at Arizona State. I think the Arizona State Sun Devils have got a bad rap this year. They've been in and out of losing their quarterback to injury, and I think Arizona State gets a victory here at home in a rivalry game. They win by, I would say it's going to be close. I think it's going to be a 6-point spread. So I think 29-23, Arizona State. Not that the score matters, but I think Arizona State wins by a possession. Georgia Tech. Now this one's an interesting one. I understand it's a rivalry game. I understand there's a lot for Georgia Tech to play for. There's not as much for Georgia to play for. If Georgia loses this game, it's not going to do much besides maybe jump them all the way back to like number 10 or so in the rankings. Georgia's trying to protect themselves from losing potentially a first-round bye or a home game. And so I don't think a loss to Georgia Tech is going to help their home game argument in the playoffs by any means. I mean, Georgia Tech is ranked outside of the top 20. But with that being said, I'm not a believer in the ACC. I'm a believer in the resiliency of the Georgia Bulldogs. They have shown it all year on a case-by-case basis. Whenever they're needed to show up and show some resiliency and to win in the fourth quarter in the second half, Georgia has done that. And, Georgia Tech did that for a good bit, for 8 or 9 games until they kind of just collapse. And, Georgia, in my opinion, is more so peaking as Georgia Tech is declining. So I think the Yellow Jackets are going to get blown out, to be honest with you. I think the Georgia Bulldogs beat them 40-24. So I think they just pull away in the second half, and there's just to ask Haynes King to pass the ball from behind is not a fun ask. So I don't know. I do know. I think that I think Georgia's just so much more of a better football team, and the SEC is so much better than the ACC this year that you're just going to see that in flying colors on Friday. So, and then Ole Miss plays Mississippi State. I got Ole Miss winning that football game by at least 10 points. It's going to be a high-scoring game, I would imagine, though. Moving on to Saturday games. Here's the ACC big game of the week. 9-2, Miami going into Pittsburgh, 8-3, coming off a big win against Georgia Tech. Pittsburgh is. Miami's kind of relatively stable in terms of momentum. Both teams got plenty to play for. Geographically, this is not a rivalry game, but I'm excited to see this one because I talked about it last week and I was correct on it. But the Panthers' run defense is one of the best in the country. It's like top 10, top 15 in most categories, and they showed it against Georgia Tech. And so if Carson Beck has another collapse game where he is throwing interceptions left and right or fumbling or making stupid decisions like he did at Georgia, from time to time, I think Pittsburgh has absolutely a chance to win this game at home. But I think I think the power is kind of, I don't know. Pittsburgh's got the momentum, and the ACC is a conundrum, like I've always talked about. And we talk about ensuing chaos, like what has to happen for these certain teams to usurp their way into a conference championship game in the ACC. Where Virginia might look on paper as if they have it easy, and I predict Virginia to win that game. I think Miami's is a better football team than Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh is hungrier. So I think that's going to bring the game a lot closer than what is anticipated from, I think, most of the nation. And so I think this is going to be a kind of a lower scoring, scrappy game. 24-20 Miami is my prediction. I think the Hurricanes get it done. You'll get Miami and Virginia in the conference championship game, unless SMU has that head-to-head and they win, and somehow that's they don't let Miami get in. I don't remember how that's supposed to work, but I do think Miami's going to get a tough ranked win against Pittsburgh, 24-20. Next on the list, Ohio State and Michigan. Yeah, good luck, Jared. We're going to predict this one, because if you want of course you do, my honest opinion on this game, and I understand, I know, I hear it all the time from the Big Ten people. Michigan's won 4 years in a row. Michigan, you hear it from that doofus Dave Portnoy all the time. Oh yeah, Michigan runs the Big Ten. All they got to think about every year is going to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I've said it for 6 weeks now. I've said Ohio State has no challenges left on the rest of their schedule besides Michigan. So what do you think they're doing for the past 6 weeks? Well, their game plan for each game, they've scored like 40 points a game, and 42-7. That's it. No need to do any more. Just score, done. And so I think they've been getting ready for Michigan the entire second half of the season. If you want my full honest opinion, which I'm sure you guys do. That's what you guys are tuning in for. I think they're taking from their Washington game. After that Washington game, they've had no challenges. Zero. Zip. Nada. Until Michigan. They rested their starters against the Rutgers. All signs point to them game planning against Michigan for the past 6 weeks. In Michigan, with a young quarterback, they're trying to battle their way to get to 9-2. They had that loss against Oklahoma earlier in the year, a loss against USC earlier in the year. Oregon just beat the brakes off of USC in terms of offense. And I do believe it's going to be a close game. It's almost always a close game between Michigan and Ohio State. And I believe both these teams are good teams this year, great teams this year. That's why I have Michigan in the top 15. Do I believe that Michigan is going to beat Ohio State this weekend and take that Big Ten championship game appearance away from Ohio State? No. I think Ohio State wins this football game 30-23. I think Ohio State has, like I said, they've been preparing for it. They've been making way for the past 6 weeks, saying, okay, we don't have a lot of challenges left on this Big Ten board. Everybody's sub 500 or less, win-loss categorically. And so Michigan's been scrapping their way, playing Nebraska, playing USC, playing Oklahoma. They've had a tougher schedule. They're more battle-ravaged than Ohio State, so you could argue there could be more battle-tested than Ohio State and could go in there and shock the world. But I think that's a lot of game planning for Michigan. And if Ohio State were to lose that game, I would laugh my ass off, because every Buckeye that I've seen on X has preached from the mountaintop that Ohio State's just in a different category. How dare you doubt Matt Patricia and Ryan Day running that offense and defense for the Buckeyes? They're just that much better than everybody else. And if they were to get beat to Michigan after my claim to be saying that Ohio State is prepped for more than almost 2 months to play Michigan after losing 4 straight games to Michigan since like COVID, that's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. And then now I could say, okay, Dave Portnoy can talk for the next 2-3 years about how Ohio State's got to even the score. So, and nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear Portnoy ramble off and say that Michigan's some top-tier SEC school when they lost to Oklahoma. So, I don't know. So, with that being said, I think Ohio State wins that rivalry game 30-23, defeating Michigan. Michigan falls 9-3 out of the playoffs. Ohio State finishes undefeated, keeping a number 1 seed for the college football playoffs and hosting a neutral site after the bye. So, big time prediction there. And am I confident in it? I would say my confidence level is like 2 or 3 out of 10. It's not big. So take it with a grain of salt for sure. Okay, last 2 predictions. Vanderbilt at Tennessee. Now, I talked about this one. I hinted at this one last week, and I said a couple times, I was like, hey, you know what? I think Vanderbilt's going to lose to Tennessee this upcoming weekend because, I don't know if you could have this many SEC teams in the college football playoffs, and you have to take it with a grain of salt, saying, okay, is Tennessee a bad team or is it a good team? What has Tennessee done to be ranked, or why does the committee rank Tennessee when they haven't really had any big wins? Well, they've played really close with really good teams, with being Oklahoma, Ole Miss, and Georgia. They played really close with all of them, have not been far away. They score points. I don't think Ole Miss is on their schedule. They lost big time to Alabama was the third one. Sorry, 37-20. And so, with that being said, this is a geographical rivalry game to where Diego Pavia is going on podcasts telling everybody, oh, yeah, we run Tennessee now. Tennessee's nothing to us. We're going to take things over. I should win the Heisman, then yada, 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 right? So Tennessee has to go in there and shut their mouths, essentially, because, Vanderbilt exposed themselves against Texas. They did. It's one of those games where, yeah, they came back and got within 3, but they were getting their asses handed to by Texas. And Texas is not a strong offense at the time. They were showing signs of weakness. And so for that to have happened, and then, yeah, they played Kentucky and beat the hell out of them, or they played Auburn like 2 weeks ago and was in a shootout with Auburn. Well, then get ready for Tennessee, because Tennessee has a high-flying offense that was outside of like one game has not scored more than 20 points. I mean, they are scoring points against a lot of teams, even Oklahoma, not Oklahoma, even Ole Miss and Georgia. Georgia scoring 40 points. Ole Miss scoring, I keep saying Ole Miss. Oklahoma, scoring 25-plus points against that defense is pretty strong. So, with all that being said, I do think Tennessee upsets Vanderbilt this weekend. I think Tennessee wins the game. I think they win. It doesn't really matter the score. I know that, but I think they win 23-17. No, they don't. No, sorry. They're going to win this football game 34-27. They're going to get that 30-plus points. They're going to be able to. They're going to for once, when it doesn't matter for Tennessee because they're already out. For once, they're going to stop an opposing offense in the SEC. For once, I think it's going to happen. I believe it's a home game for Tennessee. Let me check my sources on that right quick because I don't want to be wrong. Yep, this is a home game for Tennessee. Going into old Rocky Top. I think, yeah, let's go with that. We're going to go with that. On a confidence scale, I think it's a 5. But I think Tennessee wins 34-27 against Vanderbilt, taking Vanderbilt out of the playoffs and Diego Pavia out of the Heisman discussion, and ending up as a 9-3 solid year for Tennessee and maybe a decent bowl game. I know they're not going to make it to the college football playoff, but they had some, in terms of a rebuild type year for the SEC and Tennessee. Not bad. All right, last but not least, Oregon at Washington. Washington. This is a rivalry game between the two, obviously, and Damon Williams. I've talked about it, the highs and lows. Is he going to be superior, Damon Williams, against Oregon? Is he going to be we saw USC kind of struggle to keep up with Oregon, and Oregon's defense has shown greater signs of strength than Washington or USC's has throughout the year. We know that Dan Lanning is a great coach. We know that he has a lot of fire within that program to say, we're going to go out there and play with a certain attitude And we haven't seen that identity from Washington. It's been a little too inconsistent. But they are going into Washington. This is a game that the fans are going to show up to because it is a top 5 ranked game. The advantage would have been way past Washington's if Oregon had this at home for sure, because they are now a top 5 team according to the AP poll. But after kind of reviewing what Washington has done this year and what they have not been able to accomplish, and Oregon riding on the momentum of having a ranked win and beating Penn State, all the big brand games that they were matched up with, they relatively showed out outside of Indiana, which was they only this is going to be their 4th big game of the year, but the other 3 being USC, Indiana, and Penn State. And Penn State finished unranked. USC did not have a strong defense. They're probably going to finish 9-3 this year, pretty good year, and Indiana being Indiana this year. So, with that being said, I think Oregon wins this game 45-28. I think they score a lot of points. Continue to prove the committee that they belong in the college football playoff. Trying to fight for a potential Big Ten championship appearance, which I don't even think it's logically possible. But Dante Moore is gonna ball out once again, and nobody's talking about him for Heisman, but he's had an incredible year. He's been extremely efficient, very good about protecting the football outside of the Indiana game where it was raining. So you got to dodge the weather a little bit in that northwest corridor. But I don't think Washington's shown enough signs of consistency for them to win this game against Oregon, a top 5 ranked team. There is a possibility for it to be a lot closer than what I had projected because it is an away game, but I don't think Washington is as deafening or horrifying as going into the Oregon Duck Stadium. So we're gonna roll with Oregon winning 45-28. And my eyes are about to shut. I'm gonna tell you that right now. I am wickedly tired, and I apologize for that, but seriously, it might be these lights that are around me. I'm like literally trying not to blink. But yeah, sorry if it sounds like low energy. I promise it's not. I'm super excited for this weekend, and we've covered everything from head to toe in terms of reactions, in terms of and it was a kind of a cake week for the college football schedule this past weekend, which is why I didn't heavily rely too much on the reactions from week 13. I mean, there was really only like 4 or 5 good games to tune into. Everything else was pretty light. But this upcoming weekend, there's about 20. There's about 20 good games to be watching and keeping an eye on, and that have conference championship game repercussions, college football playoff repercussions. I mean, all of it, you name it. It's going to be a super entertaining weekend. I hope all the predictions that I made turn out well, like they have the past 4 or 5 weeks. I hope everybody has a very, very happy Thanksgiving. And last but not least, I say it again, if you haven't subscribed to the program, you made it this far back into the episode. Thanks for staying here. Really appreciate having you in. Hit the subscribe button, share it with your friends. I'm sure they will like it too. Throw some comments in there. You interact with the post. Repost it on TikTok if you see it, and all those sorts of things. I'm happy for everything. I'm trying to get to 100 subscribers before the end of the year. I don't think that's a big ask. I'm literally asking for 10 subscribers. So if 10 extra people see this, please make it 100 subscribers. And, I'm not going to bug you after that. You can even turn, if you have notifications on or off on YouTube, it's not that big of a deal. I only post once a week, and then I release a segment. So, and the segments are a great way to tune in for 3 to 5 minutes, highlighting and spotlighting important topics and areas of conversation within each episode. That way you don't have to sit there on YouTube or something like that, or at work for an hour and a half. You can pinpoint the exact thing you want to hear, and because Lord knows I covered it, and listen to it that way. So it's been a great addition to the show. Like I said, big announcement December 1st coming up on Monday. Super excited for it. I'm super excited for y'all's reaction to it, and it's going to be great. And then after that, it's Merry Christmas for everybody. So have a great Thanksgiving. Say hello to the family. Use those 5 controversial statements that I listed at the beginning of the episode, and clear the plates, gentlemen. Clear the plates. All right, y'all have a great weekend. Thank you guys for tuning in. See you later.